so this is our Unit 1 condensed version of the slides. I've mostly just deleted the practice questions, so I may delete some more as we go. All right, so first part was how we organize the nervous system. The nervous system has two primary halves, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, and the somatic nervous system is the autonomic nervous system and the somatic, which I never really teach that much on somatic, and there was a question on the practice mock exam about the somatic nervous system, which is controls muscles and stuff. The nervous system, again, brain and spinal cord, peripheral system, the brain, the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, the main part that we focus on is the autonomic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. Somatic nervous system controls voluntary movements. So not breathing, but if you were playing the piano, that would be your somatic nervous system controlling your fingers there. We'll pause. All right, so more on the peripheral nervous system. Again, the autonomic nervous system has two parts. We usually call it fight or flight, but make sure you know the actual name for fight or flight is the sympathetic nervous system, and the actual name for the rest and digest is the parasympathetic nervous system. Let's see, what is this little thing up here? I don't know how to make that go away. I wonder if it shows in the video. So the parasympathetic nervous system does include reflexes, and there's a question on the mock exam about that. But when you have a reflex, like you touch something hot, it doesn't actually get processed by your brain. That very quick response is your motor neurons saying, ouch, and it pulls your finger back, and that's because of a connection between your spinal cord and your finger. Now, if you feel pain, there's a slower message that is traveling to your brain, but that instant reflex to pull back, that is your motor neurons, your interneurons, and your spinal cord doing all that. All right, sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, all those things happen. We've talked about before. Your eyes dilate, your heart rate increases, glucose is released throughout the body, your bladder is relaxed. Parasympathetic, rest and digest, all the opposites. It calms you down, slows your heart rate, processes all the glucose, contracts your bladder. You got to go pee again. Stimulates digestion. Some other random things, your mouth goes dry, you're sweating more, your blood pressure is up, adrenaline is released. Remember, norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter version of adrenaline. The hypothalamus is causing all of this. Remember, the hypothalamus is the boss of the endocrine system, so it's releasing all of those hormones. We already talked about all that. All right, that was part 1. That was quick. All right, part 2 is about communication in the nervous system, all about neurons. Remember when we made pipe cleaner neurons? So a neuron, you've got about 86 billion of them, are the individual cells, so it is a cell in the nervous system that receives, integrates, and transmits information. It's an electrochemical message because you have that whoosh, that neural impulse, but then it releases neurotransmitters, and that's the chemical side of it. Some key parts of the neuron, you've got the cell body, also called the soma, and that includes the nucleus, and that's what's generating our neural impulse. Extending out of the cell body are our dendrites. There are antennae that are receiving messages. The axon is the long extension. It is wrapped by myelin sheath. That's the fatty substance that speeds up the neural impulse. As a child, you have less myelin sheath, and that increases with age, and that's why you think faster as you get older. Disorders like multiple sclerosis deteriorate away that myelin sheath. Both are MS. That neural impulse travels down the axon, and at the end of the axon are the terminal branches. That's where the neurotransmitters are sitting and synthesized and waiting to be released to the next neuron. Just said all those things. In between neurons, we have the synapse. That's the gap, sometimes called the synaptic gap. We know that a neuron releases neurotransmitters across there. They land on the receptor sites, which are specific points on the dendrites. They deliver their message, and then they retreat, and that's called reuptake. Some interchangeable terms. Action potential is the same thing as neural impulse. Synaptic terminal, axon terminal, terminal bud, and terminal branch, terminal buds, all the same thing. Synapse, synaptic gap, synaptic cleft, and soma and cell body. They could word them any of those ways on the AP exam. All right, so that neural impulse starts with a resting potential. It's just waiting there in order to receive a message that's going to stimulate the neuron. When it gets that message from another neurotransmitter, it creates an action potential. There's a voltage spike. There's that whoosh. It delivers that neural transmission, and then it's wiped out. It goes through an absolute refractory period, which is a brief time before it can regenerate power and fire again. We talk about the all or none law, which tells us that neurons fire at full strength or they don't fire at all. We do know that they can fire less often, so it can be whoosh, 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 or it could be whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. So less often because of things like alcohol use. Here, this diagram again is showing us where those synaptic vesicles are. Those are the little bubbles where neurotransmitters are created or synthesized. When that neural impulse travels down, it releases those neurotransmitters. And again, they either dissolve or they go through reuptake. If there are medications like SSRIs, that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, those medications would block that reuptake. And we'll talk about other agonists and drugs that could also have similar effects. We have three main types of neurons: sensory neurons, which we call afferent because they are ascending up the spinal cord from the sensory areas, interneurons, which are just kind of relay ones between all the neurons, and motor neurons are efferent, so they exit from the brain. So when you like hurt yourself, the sensory neurons ascend messages up the spinal cord, the motor neurons exit a flinch down the neuron. That reflex arc, we've already talked about it again. The immediate reflex is handled by the motor neurons and the interneurons in the spinal cord, and that causes you to flinch. But the slower response, which is your brain saying, hey, get your hand out of the fire, that's going to cause pain, that is also going up the spinal cord to the brain at the same time. But the quick reflex is handled by the spinal cord. All right, that was Part 2. Part 3, all about neurotransmitters, the chemicals released by neurons. There's a couple questions about glial cells on the mock exam for those who take it. But remember this little image right here, glial cells. They're here to support you. So the glial cells are these little blue things in the picture. So they provide structural support and nutrition to the neuron. So you have way more glial cells, about 50 glial cells to each neuron. So whatever 86 billion times 50 is, that's how many glial cells you have. So they're providing nourishment and support to the neurons. Mirror neurons are ones that, what's a better definition of them? That they respond when observing a behavior. So if you are watching somebody who's in pain and you feel a little bit of pain, like, oh, that hurts to watch, that is because of a mirror neuron. So they help create empathy. This is shown in these brain scans where somebody is actually trying to, I guess, reach for something, and somebody who's watching that other person reaching for those things, their mirror neurons light up. So it's not as strong as an effect when it's happening in the other person, but there's still an effect there in the brain. All right, neurotransmitters, those are the chemicals that are transmitting info from one neuron to another. We can skip that one. So they are created in the synaptic vesicles. There's about 50 neurotransmitters, but in our class, I think we focused on about 8. Acetylcholine, ACH, controls skeletal muscles. We've got the dancing girl because it controls her movement, but also memory, her ability to remember the dance moves. Deterioration of acetylcholine is linked to Alzheimer's disease, and too much acetylcholine, muscle spasms. You might want to go back and look at your neurotransmitter song project if you've still got those slides in your Google Drive. Dopamine, we've got the running girl and a happy one because it controls voluntary movement, but this is the primary feel-good neurotransmitter. So it's linked to rewarding feel-good. So many drugs mimic the effect of dopamine because they want to create that high that makes you feel good. Too much dopamine is linked to schizophrenia, too little to Parkinson's disease. Dopamine signals here showing kind of the difference of what happens when you add in cocaine, that it significantly enhances the dopamine in the synapse. It stays there longer, and that's what creates the high. We talked about that even your cell phone counts as like a little dopamine device, because every time you get a text message or something that you like, you see something funny while you're scrolling, you get a little rush of dopamine, and that causes the digital addiction. The next big one, serotonin. Its big job is sleep, arousal, mood, hunger, and it inhibits aggression. So this is a little different from the feels good of dopamine. Dopamine is rewarding. I ate a yummy cupcake, I laughed, I feel good from that. Serotonin is your overall vibe of your mood, that you feel good, or you don't have enough serotonin, you feel down. So definitely low levels are linked to depression. So that's why antidepressants boost serotonin levels. Let's see. Norepinephrine is our fight or flight one. It acts the same way as adrenaline. So it alerts the body. It boosts the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. Undersupply linked to depression. Too much norepinephrine is related to anxiety. You're always on alert with anxiety. GABA is an inhibitory one. It calms you down. GABA's job is to calm you down. Same thing, if there's not enough GABA, that's linked to anxiety. You don't have enough to calm you down. Glutamate is the opposite. It's excitatory. Go, 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 go. Fire again. It can overstimulate the brain and cause migraines. Foods that have lots of MSG, which is monosodium glutamate, can cause high blood pressure. Substance P stands for pain, so it's pain perception. Lack of substance P, you wouldn't feel pain. Endorphins are the body's natural opiates. They help to block pain. When you have a boost of endorphins, you could feel a runner's high, which is where you feel really good. Those people who run marathons, they bust through the physical or symbolic wall, and they have this burst of energy where they feel good, and that's endorphins. Even just exercising or laughing for a short time makes you feel good, and that's because of endorphins. Those are all the ones we just talked about. So agonists and antagonists, these are substances from outside the body that are mimicking or blocking neurotransmitters. An agonist mimics, antagonists block. So an agonist is similar enough, that's this red part here, that it can bind at a receptor site and it can increase the effect of that substance. So for example, dopamine, cocaine can act as an agonist that it'll increase the effects of dopamine. The example they always use for an antagonist is curare, which blocks acetylcholine, and acetylcholine is movement. So with curare, it blocks it, so then you would be paralyzed. Let's see, skipping all those. Keys. All right, next part is how we actually study the brain. Different ways. We can do clinical observations, we can manipulate, we can do different scans. And EEG is where they're measuring brain waves, electroencephalogram. EKG is when you're studying heart waves and heartbeat. So EEG is the brain. Looking at some different brain waves. When you're awake, you've got short, fast brain waves. When you're deep sleep, you've got slow, deep brain waves. Another way to study the brain is by lesioning. So they might do this in animals where they burn or cut out or just like destroy, lesion a part of the brain and then see what happens. PET scans are usually colorful. They're showing chemical activity in the brain, shows which areas of the brain are active. So if you're getting a PET scan, they may be reading to you or playing music or helping you try to recall memories and see what part of the brain lights up. MRI is like a big X-ray, so it's good for showing tissue and structures like brain tumors. And then fMRI shows where blood flow is happening in the brain. Let's see, remember we watched the love competition where they scanned all those people while they talked about they were in love? That was an fMRI, and they were able to see where they had who had the most blood flow while they were recalling thoughts on love. Let's see. Hemispheres. We know that we have two hemispheres of our brain, a left and right hemisphere. They have contralateral control, which means they control the opposite side of the body, but they are also lateralized, which means they have their own functions. The left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, but its focus is language, left side language. The right side controls the left side, right hemisphere controls left side of the body, and it is spatial tasks. So connecting those two halves is the corpus callosum. So when you see something with your left visual field, it's going to go to your right eye, and it crisscrosses there. Or you'll see it with your right eye, and then it crisscrosses behind there. Sorry. Let's see. Skip all that. All right, brain plasticity is the idea that your brain has the ability to recover following brain damage. It is especially elastic when you are young, but as you get older, it takes much longer to recover. That's why a child who has half her brain removed could recover within months, whereas an elderly stroke victim who has a little bit of blood flow damage in their brain may take months or never recover because they do not have the brain plasticity. Corpus callosum are the band of nerves that connect the two halves of the brain. That's how messages go across from one side to the other. Sperry and Gazzaniga did split brain operations. So for people who have severe epilepsy, which is seizures, they can cut that. But then they have two halves of their brain operating independently. One of the problems that goes with that is if you ask them about something that's in their left hand, they wouldn't be able to speak about it, or in their left field of vision, because it would go to their right side of their brain, but then it couldn't cross over to the left where language is. Next part. Brain structures. All right, we've got three big regions: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The hindbrain is at the bottom. That is all the basic primitive structures animals have are dominated by hindbrain. But that's basic things like breathing. Actually, that's my next one here. Hindbrain, don't fall behind on the essentials. So breathing, heartbeat, sleeping, balance, reflexes, all those things. Cerebellum is for balance. That's also there at the bottom. We know that it's balance and posture, but also muscle memory. And it's one of the first parts of the brain affected by alcohol. Sarah is balancing a bell. The medulla is on the brain stem there where the spinal cord comes up into the brain. Medulla, also called the medulla oblongata, primary job is breathing. We talked about medusa can take your breath away. Medusa, medulla. The pons is also there at the top of the brainstem. The pons' main job is sleep and arousal. So sleep, we talked about taking a nap next to a pond. The reticular formation, also part of the hindbrain region, alerts the brain to incoming signals. Damage to the reticular formation would put you in a coma because your brain would not realize that signals are coming up the spinal cord into the brain. We said reticular sounds like particular military formation. So when you're in military formation, you're alert to incoming signals. The brainstem there, here's the image of what it looks like. So the brainstem goes all the way up into the brain, and then the cortex area wraps over that. At the very top there is the thalamus, and that's the relay center. In the middle of the brain, the midbrain, it is the pleasure center of the brain. That's where lots of dopamine is produced. We talked about dopamidbrain. The dopamine is created in the midbrain. Damage to the midbrain could lead to Parkinson's because Parkinson's is a shortage of dopamine. The forebrain, that's the whole core wrinkly area, but also the subcortical structures underneath there. That includes the cortex, which is all of the wrinkly stuff. Full name is cerebral cortex. That's the wrinkly cauliflower part of the brain. We know it's larger in humans because we are more intelligent, or we're more intelligent because we have more cortex area. Whereas other species have less cortex area and they are less intelligent. The cortex is divided into 4 lobes. The cerebral cortex is that outer layer of the wrinkly area. The cerebrum is just below that. The cerebrum is all the complex mental activities. The cerebrum has fissures. Fissures are all the grooves between the wrinkles of the brain. A serious bum, the cerebrum, is where complex thinking happens. I'm a serious bum, cerebrum. All right, the thalamus is then technically part of the forebrain because it's just underneath the cerebral cortex. That's our relay center. All of the sensory signals, except for smell, go through the thalamus, and then they are relayed to other parts of the brain. So vision signals come up, and then they go to the occipital lobe. Hearing sound signals come up, they go to the ears. The hypothalamus, we talked about the 4 F's, which is on here. Fight or flight, feeding, and fun times or fooling around, which is mating and sexual desire. But hunger, thirst, sexual desire, body temperature are all regulated by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls the endocrine system, and that's why it can control so many of those other behaviors. We talked about hypothalamus related to hunger. When they were able to destroy it or activated it, these rats would get really big or really small. The limbic system is multiple brain parts that are all related to emotions and memory. The emotional tree limbs, the limbic system is part of emotions. The hippocampus, we know, does long-term memory formation. It does not store the memories. It creates the memories, and then they're stored throughout the cortex. Hippos must remember where their classes are on campus. The amygdala is the fear and aggression and anger sensation area of the brain. Amygdala is angry and has lots of rage. Let's see. The pituitary gland is the master gland. It is controlled by the hypothalamus, but it tells all the other glands what to do. And that was our parts of the brain. Another one, brain regions. All right, so our different lobes of the brain. The cerebral cortex, the frontal lobe is at the front. It is personality, judgment, decision-making. We know that it is not fully developed until your 20s. So as teenagers, your brain's not done yet, which means your frontal lobe is still getting more connected to the rest of your brain. Speech, production is in the left frontal lobe. It's on the left side, but in the frontal lobe because that's where the motor cortex is. Movement is in the frontal lobe. Student at the front of the class, lots of judgment, planning, organized, and they're ready to speak. That's the frontal lobe. Prefrontal cortex is at the front of the frontal lobe, and that's problem solving. So prefrontal cortex, problem solving, emotion, complex thoughts. We talked about Phineas Gage, the railroad worker who had the rod that went through his head. That case study showed us that the frontal lobe handles personality because when that rod went through his head, it significantly changed his personality. Excuse me. The motor cortex is located on the back edge of the frontal lobe. So all that movement in the brain scan here where it's all lit up, that's from movement from different parts of the body. Texas motor cortex. Motor is movement. Homunculus is that weird little looking man. The weird proportionality of his body represents how much cortex space you have dedicated to movement. So for example, your hands and fingers can move in so many ways. Think like to snap your fingers. So his hands are really big. His facial muscles can move a whole lot, like his lips and his tongue. They have a lot of motor cortex area dedicated to that. So he has a really big mouth and tongue. Let's see. So the amount of cortex area is based on how much movement or how sensitive it is. So the sensory cortex, the more sensitive parts of your body have more sensory cortex area. So like your calves are not very sensitive, so they don't get hardly any sensory area. The parietal lobe is at the top. Parietal lobe is touch and body sensations, including temperature and pain. Sensory cortex is in there. The occipital lobe is vision at the back of your head. It includes the primary visual cortex. If you kept your brain flashcards, it would be a good idea to skim through those a couple times. Temporal lobe is on the side by your ears. That is auditory processing. Remember that speech and language are on the left side. So Wernicke's area is on the left. Remember that it's processed by the opposite side. So as you're hearing me, if you're first hearing me in your left ear, those auditory signals are going to your right temporal lobe. Hear the tempo of the music. We talked about motor basic cortex areas versus association areas. If it's an association area, it handles the more complex processing. Language processing, Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe. Remember, if your jaw is a Broca, you can't do any talka because Broca's area moves the jaw muscles. Wernicke's area, if your Wernicke's area is broken, I sound like wah, 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 because Wernicke's area is language processing. The motor cortex up there is helping you to pronounce words. That's in the frontal lobe. Visual cortex to see and also kind of like hear language. Again, all of this is on the left side of the brain. Language, so aphasia is when language does not work. So Broca's aphasia, you wouldn't be able to talk. Wernicke's aphasia, you wouldn't be able to understand language. Let's see, ventricles are not really a structure, but they are the hollow areas in the brain that are filled with fluid. The ventricles are larger in people with schizophrenia. The endocrine system. Oh my gosh, this section is so long, y'all. All right, the endocrine system are all the chemicals that are released as hormones into the bloodstream. The hypothalamus is the brain structure that tells the endocrine system what to do, but it primarily tells the pituitary gland what to do, and the pituitary tells all the other ones what to do. So pituitary gland is the master gland, is the boss. It especially handles growth hormones. So people who are short, blame your pituitary gland. Remember, the nervous system sends messages through neurons. It's very fast. The endocrine system sends messages through hormones. It's a lot slower, but the effects last longer. Hormones are created through the endocrine glands. Some of them are identical to neurotransmitters. So, for example, norepinephrine is a neurotransmitter. Adrenaline is identical in function to norepinephrine, but it is a hormone. Let's see, go through a few of the important ones. We already talked about pituitary. Adrenal gland is on the kidneys, and it makes adrenaline. Thyroid gland is metabolism. People with thyroid problems have weight issues. Pineal gland produces melatonin. It's affected by light, helps with sleep. The gonads, both males and females have gonads. The female version are ovaries. They produce estrogen. Males are testes, and they produce testosterone. The pancreas is a giant gland. It looks like an organ, but it is technically a gland. It creates and regulates glucose. People who are diabetic, they have bad pancreases. Leptin and ghrelin are hormones that both tie into hunger. Leptin tells you, let's see, before you're eating that you're hungry, so leptin comes up. When you're full, leptin is down. Ghrelin is the one that tells you, ghrelin, like a gremlin, that you're hungry. You're going to have to wait a few minutes. I'm finishing up. Ghrelin tells you that you're hungry. You're the ghrelin gremlin. And then leptin is down. They're the opposite. All right, cortisol, that's the hormone, that's the stress hormone. Cortisol, it's good to have because it helps with fight or flight, but if you have it too long, it's suppressing your immune system, decreases serotonin, can cause a lot of other problems. Thyroxine is the thyroid hormone. Let's see, the last, I think we have one or two more sections. Sleep is in here. I'm going to pause. I'm going to finish sleep on Monday. We'll pause with sleep and we'll start there next week, because I'm tired.